For over 400 years, the transatlantic slave trade scarred three continents: Africa, Europe, and the Americas. We often picture European ships on the ocean, but the tragic journey for millions began much earlier, inland, orchestrated by African slave traders and middlemen. This is a side of the story we don't always hear, but it's crucial for understanding the full, devastating picture. Across West and Central Africa, a complex network of powerful kingdoms, local chiefs, and merchants emerged as key players in this global trade. European traders rarely ventured far from their coastal forts. They couldn't survive the diseases, and they didn't know the terrain. So, they relied on these African intermediaries to supply them with captives. Who were these captives? They were often prisoners from regional wars, people kidnapped during violent raids, or even those sold to settle a debt or as punishment for a crime. African traders then forced these enslaved people on grueling journeys, sometimes for hundreds of miles, to the coast. There at forts like Elmina or Cape Coast, human lives were exchanged for goods: textiles, alcohol, metal tools, and most critically, firearms. Guns completely changed the game. They dramatically shifted the balance of power among African states. Kingdoms like Dahomey, Asante, and Oyo used these new weapons to conquer their neighbors, which in turn generated more captives for the slave trade. It created a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle of warfare and enslavement. But it's vital to know that African participation was not a united front. Far from it. Many communities fiercely resisted. They fought back against slave raiders, built defensive walls, and moved to more remote areas to escape. Countless villages were destroyed, families were shattered, and millions lived in a constant state of terror, fearing capture. They were victims of this system, not willing partners. We also have to be clear about the power dynamics. Europeans created the insatiable demand for labor on their American plantations. They owned the ships, financed the voyages, and constructed the brutal system of chattel slavery, a lifelong inherited status that treated people as property. African middlemen operated within a system they didn't create, often driven by the immense pressure of political survival and economic gain in a world being violently reshaped by outside forces. The story of African involvement is not about shifting blame. It's about facing the tragic complexity of history. It shows how global greed can exploit and deepen local conflicts, turning people against each other in a system that ultimately brought devastation to the entire continent. Understanding this painful history helps us see how deeply interconnected the slave trade was, and why its legacy continues to affect us all today. Thanks for watching.